Good afternoon. It's Peggy Walsh with the Ontario Public Health Association. I'm your moderator today for a session on increasing driver awareness and knowledge of safely sharing the road with cyclists. And I'd like to welcome you all to being part of today's webinar. We've set aside an hour for this webinar, and it'll be a chance to hear more about this topic from Colleen Cooper, and as well for you to ask questions, comments, and to offer ideas that can support the work that Colleen and her colleagues have underway. I just want to take a moment and mention to you that the OPHA, Ontario Public Health Association, is pleased to offer webinars on a wide range of topics. It's a chance for members and others in the public health community to hear about new ideas, to hear about promising practices in public health, to share their success stories, and as well to engage in interactive discussion and get feedback. So I wanted to raise this because we're always interested if people want to offer suggestions about topics that they would like to see for our webinar. So for today's webinar, I'm pleased to welcome Colleen Cooper. Colleen, as you may have seen from her presentation, is a public health nurse with the region of Waterloo Public Health. She's been in this role for over 30 years, and she's a champion of Active and Safe Routes to Schools initiative and a promoter of CAN-BITE skills training. In addition, Colleen is an active champion of cycling, and I see that she rides her bike to commute to work and uses it for errands around town and is able to cycle for about 9 months of the year. Colleen is a member of our Ontario Public Health Association Health Built Work Environment Group, and this is the work that has been going on in this group that she wants to share with you today. So you're going to get a chance to hear how Colleen and her colleagues have been tackling their concern about safe cycling and driver awareness, some of the successes that they've had, and she very much welcomes your ideas about other strategies and approaches that they can be considering. After Colleen ends her presentation, it will be a chance for you to ask questions and offer comments, and you'll see some instructions in terms of how to raise your hand using our chat box, and we will then remove the mute so that you can also offer your ideas and comments via the phone. So I'd like to invite Colleen now to get us underway, and then I'll return speaking with you once she's finished her presentation. So Colleen, welcome to today's webinar, and we look forward to hearing on this topic.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as Peggy has mentioned, the study was conducted by the OPHA and the Built Environment Work Group. A small subgroup formed off of the Built Environment Work Group to look specifically at cycling issues and how we can get motorists more informed with regard to what they need to know about sharing the road with bicycles. And so why do we think this is important from a public health perspective? We all know that increasing physical activity opportunities is good for the population. The more we do have a problem with people not getting enough physical activity, and cycling is a great way to incorporate physical activity just in your day-to-day life, because you can cycle as a means of transportation, and then it actually doesn't require extra time to go out and exercise for just for the sake of exercising. In my community, something that's of interest here in the region of Waterloo is that 75% of our residents live within 10 kilometers of school or work, and 5 to 10 kilometers is considered a really bikeable distance. So we have a potential to engage a lot of citizens in cycling as a means of transportation. But over the years, the Share the Road Cycling Coalition out of Burlington conduct surveys of the population across the province, asking them what the barriers are to cycling. And about 60% of people cite fear as a barrier to cycling. So in other words, these people don't feel comfortable riding on the road because they don't maybe have the knowledge that they need, but they're also concerned about car drivers around them. So we wanted to look at how can we give car drivers more information about sharing the road with cyclists. And hopefully, as a result, more people will choose cycling for transportation and increase physical activity levels. So go on to the next slide. Okay. Okay, so what we looked at, again, were some of the data that was out there around who's getting hit on their bike and how we could sort of mitigate some of that. So one of the things that we looked at was the coroner's cycling death review that was released in the last year or two. And one of the things that was made clear in that review is that in about 18% of bicycle motor vehicle collisions, the driver was in that 16 to 20 year age range. So in other words, a young, somewhat inexperienced driver. So we thought, gee, is there a way that we can look at this group and provide them with a little bit more information? So moving on to the next slide, our little task group is made up of a partnership of people from across the province that include people who work in public health departments, people from the Ministry of Transportation, people who work in municipalities in transportation demand management and planning. And if anybody isn't familiar with transportation demand management, these are positions where they're looking at ways of trying to increase mode share away from the individual car to other modes of transportation. And some of these participants have been from Niagara, Waterloo, Oxford, Hamilton, Haldimand, Norfolk, Windsor, Ottawa, and we've got them listed here, people from across the province. And we're always looking for new members and people who would like to contribute. So if there's anybody here who hadn't heard of our group but is interested, we'll talk about that at the end, about how you might get connected. Okay, so we'll go on now to, so the purpose of our little task group, the subgroup of the Built Environment Work Group, we wanted to increase driver education component of safely sharing the road with cyclists in a few different ways, and part A was through increasing cycling information in the official MTO Driver's Handbook. So just to give you a little bit of information about this, as you may remember, when you went to get your driver's license, there's a driver's handbook that you need to study to get you ready to write your written test and take your driving test. And in looking at that particular handbook, it seemed to us that there was a lack of information about how cars should interact with cyclists. And so our work group went through the handbook and made a number of recommendations that we then submitted to the Ministry of Transportation. And we were only one group in the province that did that. There were many groups and municipalities and different organizations that also submitted recommendations to the Ministry of Transportation as to how they might want to increase the information in their driver's handbook. Then in June the 4th of 2012, the Ministry of Transportation actually held a full-day consultation session where they brought many stakeholders together to sort of go over recommendations that had been submitted and to debate what should be included, what shouldn't be included. And there are many, many stakeholders out there, and there are many people who want things added to this handbook and not just about cycling. So on that day, we were actually broken into two groups, and one group was looking more at sort of cycling, pedestrian, single vehicle issues, and another group was looking at sort of large commercial vehicles and things like that. So there are a lot of stakeholders that have an interest in what's included in that driver's handbook. And so it was quite a process that we went through. But it was also very exciting, to sort of go through this process. So the new, we'll go on to the next slide. And so some of the objectives in doing this were that we wanted the driver handbook to include information on recognizing bicycles as vehicles, and that cars and drivers need, cars and cyclists need to follow the same rules of the road. and how to drive when there are cyclists on the road, and understanding cycling signage and line markings. A lot of the infrastructure pieces that are popping up to support cyclists aren't always, drivers don't always understand what they mean or how they're supposed to maneuver around that. So we wanted to see what we could do to educate drivers a little bit more. Okay, so on to the next slide. And after the consultations that took place and all the recommendations, the driver's handbook was revised and was released about a year ago. And the exciting thing was that a cyclist actually made it onto the front page of the driver's handbook. And this was not the case before. And so in going through the driver's handbook, you know, we didn't, quote, get everything we wanted in there, but a lot of improvements were made. And we'll just go on to the next slide. And these are a sample of some of the changes that happened. The word bicycle was only mentioned 28 times in the old book, but it was mentioned 83 times in the new one. There were only 4 pictures of cyclists before, and now there are 10. There were no pictures of bike facilities in the old book, and there were 6 pictures in the new. And facilities were only mentioned once in the old book, but 16 times in the new, and signage on and on. So this was really exciting for us, particularly, you know, pictures of cyclists, because again, we want cyclists to be viewed as just a normal part of the road, that not that they're an exception on the road, but that wherever you go, you may encounter a cyclist. So the more pictures that are put in just any kind of picture depicting things on the road, the better from our point of view. So we considered our that portion of our project, Part A, getting those changes to the driver's handbook, complete. The driver's handbook is something that will be looked at every so many years, and other opportunities will come to add new things. But at this point in time, it's kind of closed now that they've done this major revision. So then we moved on to Part B, which is really mostly what we're going to talk about today. And the Part B, the purpose of it was to create a policy that driver education companies must include sharing the road with cyclist education into their teaching. So again, when we go back to that slide I showed a bit earlier about 18% of car drivers that are involved with cyclist collision are in that young age group, we wanted to know, well, what are they being taught about sharing the road with cyclists? And so we wanted to delve into this a little bit deeper. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. So our objective in this part of our work group was to find out what was included in the beginner driver education program. So that's what that acronym is, beginner driver education programs. So what sort of cycling safety education was being taught, and particularly with regard to these new motorists about sharing the road with cyclists. The thing that's, and I think another reason why it's so important to focus on these new drivers is that if we look at sort of what's happened to the generation that's just coming into driving years or driving age, a lot of them are not cyclists or haven't been taught cycling skills or even pedestrian skills. These are things that have sort of fallen by the wayside. You know, again, when I was a kid, everybody walked or cycled to school, and maybe the police came and did something in your schoolyard or whatever. There seemed to be a little bit more emphasis on teaching kids these skills. And in many jurisdictions now, there simply isn't opportunity for kids to learn how to be good pedestrians or cyclists. This is a bad thing when they get to be car drivers then, because a lot of those fundamental skills that we maybe had when we were learning to drive, a lot of the new drivers today don't necessarily have them. So one person on our group even said, I think we should have a CAN bike skills training day for every kid who's taking driver education. And that would be really nice, but I think that would be a hard sell to the driver education schools. So we'll go on to the next slide. So we wanted to, look into to figure out, like, well, what does the Ministry of Transportation indicate is supposed to be taught in driver education schools? How many different curricula are there out there? How do people get trained? So we did a lot of delving in to find out what really goes into producing curricula for beginner driver education. And what we discovered about, and we can go on to the next slide, with regard to the Ministry of Transportation itself, at one time they actually developed the curricula themselves that was then delivered by different beginner driver education schools. In 2007 that changed. So what the Ministry of Transportation did at that time was they listed a number of topics that needed to be included in a driver education curricula. And you can see what these are by going on the Ministry of Transportation website and just Googling BDE, Beginner Driver Education, and everything will come up and you'll find it. I mean, you have to delve around in there quite a bit to try and figure it out, but there's a lot of stuff there. And so this is a snapshot of one of the things from their web. So this outlines that in the curriculum content standards, they do have a section entitled Sharing the Road. And the purpose of that was to develop knowledge, appreciation, and skills related to effectively interacting with other road users and how it contributes to safe and responsible driving. And then it has your intended learning outcomes and required topics. So although we can find cycling mentioned in these are a little bit vague in that they don't tell the schools how to do this or what to say, but just rather you need to include some of this stuff. So it could be something as simple as, the driver training school saying you need to share the road in a safe and considerate manner. So what does that mean? So we did find that the content standards were a little bit vague, and we tried to find out more about how that would really translate into actual curricula. Okay, on to the next slide. So what we discovered is that after this change with the ministry listing their content standards, then people or groups or businesses went out and wrote curricula that they then submitted to the Ministry of Transportation for approval. And so someone at the ministry would go through, look at your curricula and say, yes, you meet the standard, or no, you don't. And so what we discovered is that there are about 28 different approved curricula floating around in the province, plus Young Drivers has their own exclusive curricula that they don't sell to anybody else. And also there are still a few, 11 school boards across the province that have their own curricula and they teach driver training. So at one time I think most school boards did, but now there are only 11 school boards that continue to do that. So of that 28 approved curricula, that is like people develop that and then they could sell it to driver training schools. If someone wanted to set up a shop, they could buy curricula from someone else. So in looking at these different curricula, we found that there was a lot of inconsistency with regard to the amount of instructor training that went along with the curricula. Everything from I just called up and they mailed it to me and I read it and delivered it to a couple of days of training on the curricula about how it should be delivered. There's different training for in-car and classroom teachers, and often these two groups of people never talk, which we also found really interesting. So if you had a student in class that maybe you had some concerns about, it might be helpful to discuss that with the in-car person. But very often the two groups did not meet. Whoops. And sorry, my screen just timed out there. It seemed to us that it would make more sense for some of that training to be provided to both groups. Some of the curricula did not mention bicycles at all. Some included share the road, but it was minimal and sometimes incorrect. And to give you an example of incorrect, one of the curricula that we looked at, said right in it, if you're on a narrow road and you encounter a cyclist and there's a car coming in the opposite direction, try and squeeze by, which we didn't think was really very helpful. We would have preferred to say, hold back until it is safe for you to pass by changing lanes to pass, not, quote, squeezing by. And some instructors were on their own accord including additional info that was not in the curricula just because they felt that they should include it. Okay, so then what we decided to do, and you can go on to the next slide, we thought, well, maybe it would be helpful if we surveyed the driver training schools across the province and just, find out what, their answers to some questions that we had. And with regard to all of the questions that we asked in our beginner driver education curriculum study, they are included in a report that is posted on the Ontario Public Health Association website. And so we'll make sure that you get the link to the full report. So if there's anything that I say today that you would like more information about, you can look at the study itself. So I work here at the Region of Waterloo Public Health, and we took on the role of being the lead researcher. So developed the survey, ran it through our research approval process, and administered the survey. We were assisted by staff from Niagara Region Public Health and Oxford County Public Health, and all three of those health units that I've mentioned contributed to funding for the study. So we did actually pay somebody to call the driver education schools, ask them if they wished to participate, and if they said yes, then got their email and contact information so that we knew where to send the survey to. Okay, so we'll go on to the next slide. So the purpose of the study was to better understand the needs and attitudes of the beginner driver education staff regarding including and or enhancing Share the Road with Cyclists curriculum content. So we wanted to know a couple of things. First of all, were they in fact teaching things about sharing the road with cyclists? But also, did they as instructors think that it was important to do that? And so some of our questions were with, what curriculum were they using, and what do they teach about sharing the road? What were their attitudes about sharing the road and about teaching sharing the road, and what was the name of the curriculum, or I'm sorry, what curriculum needs did they have? So in other words, maybe they thought it was important, but they didn't have any resources to do it. So those were some of the things that we wanted to find out from the survey. So on to the next slide. So we discovered that there are 977 beginner driver education schools in Ontario, and we say at 449 sites. So some owners of driver schools have 2, 3, up to 20 different sites. So that's why the number of companies is lower than the number of sites. And if anybody is wondering like where all these approved schools are, they are all listed on the Ministry of Transportation website, and also schools that have been approved but have lost their approval rating are also listed there. So it is a bit of a caveat emptor type thing. If you're wanting to sign your child or yourself up for driver education, nobody has to tell you whether or not they're approved. but you can find out by going on the website and looking it up. So unfortunately, there are people who take driver education from schools that are not approved. So that's a whole other problem. So the number of schools that we called was 406, and that number was strictly based on the amount of money that we had, because we had to pay so much per call. And of those 406, 231 agreed to have the survey sent to them. There were some of these larger schools like school boards and young drivers, and there were 11 of those that were contacted by phone. And we had 75 out of that 231 schools complete over 50% of the survey for a 31% response rate. So the results of our survey. We asked how satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the general content of the current curriculum that you use. And 62% did say that they were satisfied. But again, that leaves the other 38% that were either only somewhat satisfied or right down to dissatisfied. So there was a little bit that could have been done to make the curriculum a little bit better. On to the next one. How important does your school think it is for students to learn about sharing the road with cyclists? And 86% of them did think it was important, and we're happy about that, because at least if the attitude and the will is there, that's a good first step. The next question we asked is, do you think there is a need for all beginner driver education curricula in Ontario to include a section about sharing the road with cyclists? And most of them did think that would be a good idea. Then we asked, did the curricula that they were using teach about sharing the road with cyclists? And we found that about 96% said yes to that. Again, it didn't give us details about how much or what, but nonetheless, yes. And then the next slide, how satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the information your curriculum includes? And only about half were satisfied, and then again, everything from somewhat down to dissatisfied. So again, maybe a little bit of area for improvement there. And then the next slide will sort of list, and this might be a bit hard to read, but again, this is all in the report if you care to look it up. We asked about specific details around cyclists and motorists. So the questions we asked here, if they responded no, that's what the bar indicates. So does your school teach blocking the vehicle lane with your car endangers cyclists by forcing them to suddenly merge with motorized traffic? So no. So there's not, and we noticed that there's very little in the curricula about bike lanes and how to interact with them. So some of the others, to stay back from cyclists at railway crossings, when a bicycle is entitled to take the entire lane. That's a really interesting one. And other things that I'm working on right now, there have been many, many conversations about a bicycle and when it's entitled to take the entire lane of traffic. So I don't know if this is something that people on the line have given thought to, but according to the Highway Traffic Act, cyclists are supposed to ride as close to the side of the road as is practicable, which is, of course, subject to interpretation. In CanBike, the general rule is that you ride 1 meter out from the curb or the edge of the road. But there are times when for a cyclist's safety, they should take the entire lane, and that has to do with if there are holes, debris, things like that in the cycling part of the lane. If the lane is too narrow for you to share with a car, you're entitled to take the whole lane. And a lot of people don't understand that. And as a cyclist, I know that the few times when I have taken the entire lane, I sometimes am met with horn honking and finger waving. So we think it's really important that people realize that there are times when cyclists are entitled to take the entire lane of traffic. And then we asked about, do they know what hand signals are, the impact of weather on a cyclist, et cetera, et cetera. So we had, varying degrees of the no answer, or perhaps they didn't answer at all. And then we also asked on the next slide another question, just is there anything else that you teach related to safe driving around cyclists? And I thought the first answer was a little bit comical because it just says, general safety example, be extra careful. And I don't find that quite specific enough about what does that mean to be extra careful. So, but they are trying to, there are some people that are trying to include a few other things about cars and bikes sharing the road. So then we also asked them on the next slide about their professional development opportunities. And it's quite distressing that, the majority do not have any professional development opportunities. Some of the things that we found is that there was curricula out there still being used that was over 20 years old, and there are many things that have changed with regard to roads in the last 20 years. So in addition to not maybe having a lot of good information about cyclists, there's probably other things that curricula lacks as well. And so this whole concept of not having those professional development opportunities seems really distressing. Even in bicycle education with CanBike, which for those of you who don't know what CanBike is, it's the only accredited bicycle safety training program that's available in Canada. It was developed by Cycle Canada and is administered in the different provinces by different organizations. But one of the things there, that program has some weaknesses as well, but one of the things there is they've now instituted that every instructor has to write an exam every year to keep their certification. So I really support that ongoing professional development and find it a bit scary that so many people out there don't have that opportunity. And then with the next slide, we did go on to ask them who offers professional development opportunities. There were a few different responses. The biggest response came from curriculum providers. And that would make sense to us that if you're developing the curriculum that you might want to do some professional development opportunities for the people who are going to deliver it. So there seems to be an area that could be improved for sure. And then on to the next slide, we also asked them, besides the curriculum, like what other resources do you use to teach about sharing the road with cyclists? And the one resource that the most people mentioned was the driver's handbook, which we know from the very first part of this presentation didn't have a lot of information about cyclists in it until recently, the last year or so. Some of them use videos, discussion sessions, newspaper articles. There's a variety. Provided, would you consider using them? And almost 100% of people had an interest in that. So just on to the discussion now of the overall survey on the next slide. So what we discovered is that most of the curricula, almost 100%, do address sharing the road with cyclists in some form, but again, the depth of that is questionable. 95% agreed that they should include that information, which is really a positive sign, because we would have been worried if people said, well, you know, that's not really an important topic. So we were glad that people at least thought it was an important topic. Approximately half were either neutral or only somewhat satisfied with the content of the curriculum that they were currently using. 15 felt that it needed more, and 97% were open to enhanced teaching. So as a result of this information, we came up with 3 recommendations as a result of doing the survey. And on to the next slide. The first one was to advocate for mandatory cycling content in the MTO's beginner driver education curriculum standards. So these were the standards I talked about right at the beginning that seemed kind of vague, like just you have to talk about sharing the road. We'd like to see it a bit more specific about you must talk about how to interact with cyclists and, you know, some points under that. So that was our first recommendation. The second recommendation on the next slide was to advocate for all MTO-approved beginner driver education educators to receive regular, consistent professional development training. And I've just kind of talked about the reason behind that. And recommendation number 3 was to encourage the Ministry of Transportation to identify accurate and consistent sharing the road with cyclist resources for beginner driver education educators to use as additional teaching tools. So what has happened since this survey was completed? The report that I mentioned to you that is posted on the OPHA website was given directly to Minister Murray, and he was seen looking through it. So we know that that it got there. Fortunately, one of the people on our committee was on a committee with Minister Murray and handed it right to him, and he did look through it as she was sitting with him. The report is posted on the website, as I mentioned, and the recommendations were presented at Regional Council in my jurisdiction and were endorsed by our Regional Council with a letter going forward to the Ministry saying that they endorsed the recommendations of our report. And this has happened in other jurisdictions since since this presentation was prepared, but I'm just not fully aware of who all those people are, so I didn't write them down. But a request to other people that are on the work group were taking it to their own councils to get those endorsements. So again, with regard to, as I mentioned, the whole project had Part A, the driver's handbook, Part B, that was this driver training piece, and which is still in progress, but that we're not able to do a whole lot with right now. Although one of the things that we also did, the 4 of us that have sort of been working on the core group, is we did develop some, we are recommending the CAA cycling website as a good tool for driver education schools. And if you've never been on the CAA/cycling, I think it's caa.ca/cycling website, it has really good information both for cyclists and motorists about sharing the road. And we recommended that as a go-to website. And we also developed 5 PowerPoint slides and some sort of fact sheets that driver education schools could use, and that we've asked the ministry if they would consider posting them right on their website to make them accessible to all driver education schools. Haven't heard about that yet, but that's in progress. But there's also the whole Part C that this is where we're putting a request out to everybody on the line. Part C, the purpose is to increase the knowledge of current motorists on sharing the road and the rights and responsibilities of cyclists. Because, of course, we have a whole bunch of drivers out there that may need information about how to share the road with cyclists. When I was speaking with Pegeen yesterday, just preparing for this, we were just having some sort of general conversations about things that we observe or see out there. And I know myself, being involved in this topic for quite a few years, it seems that there's often people divide themselves into, one group out there, like I'm a car driver or I'm a cyclist or I'm a pedestrian. But in actual fact, most of us are all of those things, and I certainly am. I'm not just a pedestrian or just a cyclist or just a motorist, and I need to know how all of those things work together. And we don't want to be putting the onus for our roads working in a smooth way just with car drivers. However, there is some basic information that it is important for car drivers to know about cyclists. Just the fact that they're bigger and they can cause a lot of damage if they run into a cyclist. We really want to prevent some of those kinds of things from happening. But we recognize that all road users need to be participating and cooperating with other road users. So I don't want to, insinuate for a minute that it's all the responsibilities on the car driver. So we know that there is a need for education out there for cyclists, for pedestrians, for motorists. And it's really difficult to take that on, because to do really good campaigns, they need to be widespread in terms of going right across the province and take a lot of money and that sort of thing. However, we do know that there's a lot of people out there working in their own communities to try and enhance this knowledge transfer. And myself here in the region of Waterloo, this spring we've been, Public Health has been working in partnership with our 3 local municipalities, other departments within the region, our TDM people, and our Transportation Engineering Services, and also the Ministry of Transportation, CAA, and we've all come together to work on a share the road type of campaign where we have messages targeted at cyclists and messages targeted at motorists, and we're about to start rolling this out at the beginning of June. And some of the things that we're going to be doing are some radio ads that are geared mostly towards motorists about leaving space, not honking your horn, different etiquette things with regard to interacting with cyclists. And we're having an entire insert in our local newspaper on June the 5th. It's a 16-page insert just filled with information about cycling. And I'd like to thank the Ministry of Transportation for being a major funder of that project. So that is one Share the Road type of campaign. And we also have a big social media component to the campaign where we'll be doing tweets and contests and things like that. So we're happy to share that with anybody once we've gotten through it and see how it kind of goes. And we're basing our campaign, it's called Thumbs Up Waterloo Region. And if you're wondering what the thumbs up means, just so happened I was out in Nova Scotia last fall. One of my children lives out there, and I saw a really cool sign. It looked like your typical share the road with a car and a bike, but instead of just the car and the bike, they had the bike person on the bike giving a thumbs up to the car and the person in the car giving a thumbs up to the person on the bike. And it was this really positive message like, yeah, we both have places to go and we both need to get there safely. And so did some investigation, and this Thumbs Up Nova Scotia campaign was developed by Dalhousie University. And if you Google Thumbs Up Nova Scotia, you'll find their Facebook page and information about it. And Dalhousie was very gracious and was, said yes, we could use their materials and borrow their concept. And they developed this concept for Thumbs Up with extensive public consultation right across the province. So it was what the people thought was a really positive way of getting this share the road concept across. And so that's what we're hoping to do, sort of in Part C. And if we could just go on to the last slide so that I can just conclude by saying that our group, we are at a bit of a standstill right now for a couple of reasons. There's not a lot of people working on it, so even though we have sort of regular teleconferences, maybe a couple of times a year, that are sent in by a few different people across the province, there's really only about 4 or 5 active members working on this work group. And so we need to determine if there's interest across the province to continue, or if there are other objectives that need to be addressed, or just what other members out there think needs to be done, or how we should go about moving this along to the next step. So that sort of concludes the presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Bekin.
Well, thank you, Colleen. I found that fascinating, starting out from the beginning, showing how working with others, you were able to influence the handbook with the Minister of Transportation, so the very positive outcome there. And then this comprehensive study that you've done to better understand what's happening with driver education and the curriculum that is used, and then some of the specific things that are happening in your own community to try to tackle those issues that surface. Now, I see that a number of our listeners do have questions, so why don't we just jump in, and Colleen, I'll have you answer some of those.
Okay.
So we're starting out with Pat Fisher is asking, has there been any discussion about developing resources for BDE instructors, or do you think that should be done by someone else?
Well, I think I just kind of mentioned that right at the end, that we have developed a few things that we've tried to pass on to the Ministry of Transportation. There is actually a group in Ontario of people who write curriculum for driver education, and they meet with a representative from the Ministry of Transportation, and we've tried to get invited to that table, but we haven't been successful yet. We wanted to go and present our survey to them, and they said they might have us sometime, but they weren't ready for us right now. So I think it is. I think
there's opportunity there, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I see another one of our listeners, Teresa Berzniak, has asked what similar initiatives are being done by other provinces, territories across Canada, or is Ontario the most proactive province for promoting safe road sharing for drivers and cyclists? So you did give the example of Nova Scotia, and I'm wondering if there's anything else you want to add.
Well, I think I mentioned to you yesterday, Pegeen, that the TIRF, the Traffic Injury Research Foundation, just sent out a notice that they're going to be doing some, they're going to be looking at online beginner driver education curricula sort of across the country. And so we have tried to link with them, because I don't know the details of what they're doing, but just because it had to do with driver education, we were trying to link in with them to see what kinds of things they're looking at. It's really complicated, is all I can say. In doing our investigation into this, it's really difficult to know exactly what's going on. So I encourage all of you to go on the website and delve in and ask some questions, MTO people you might know, because we certainly don't have it all clear in our minds, that's for sure.
So here's another comment by Karen Kuzmich, and my apologies if I'm mispronouncing people's last names. In the spirit of knowledge uptake and dissemination, Karen's sister-in-law owns a few training sites of a well-known driving program. The slides you mentioned wanted the Minister of Transportation to post. Is this something that she could pass along directly?
And perhaps you can. I think maybe I need to talk to the other people in the group about that, because I wouldn't want to just make that decision on my own, but I'd be happy to ask that question. And if you want to, you know, send me an email with your contact information, I'll respond one way or the other.
The other thing I want to mention is that if people want to offer a comment or offer a suggestion or ideas or questions, just indicate online, put your hand up, and we'll unmute your line, and we welcome your verbal comments, or you're free to also continue to ask written questions or offer comments. We have Justin Jones has put up their hand to offer a comment.
Hi, so it's Justin. I'm the education coordinator for Share the Road. So I just wanted to weigh in on a couple things really quick. I think one of the things that isn't taught in driver's ed that we can definitely be focusing on, and I think is you know, that we all need to be thinking about, is the changes to the Highway Traffic Act that were proposed. You know, these had all party support, and they're likely to come back to the House once the legislature reconvenes. So those included a 3-foot passing law, which is very, you know, I mean, very important, you know, from what you were talking about, Colleen, with the drivers, you know, saying, with the education saying that you should squeeze by them. You know, under the 3-foot passing law, they would be teaching a student to do something that's explicitly illegal. And then the other things in there, you know, cyclists on paved shoulders, contraflow bike lanes, and then the other big one is heavily increased fines for dooring. And that's a really easy one, I think, for driver's ed to train, is to make sure that we're encouraging driver's education instructors to make sure that they're training their students to either open their door with their right hand to avoid just kind of flinging the door out, or to make sure that they're checking their mirror and shoulder checking before they open the door to avoid dooring a cyclist.
Thank you, Justin. I see that Teresa has her hand up as well. Teresa? Okay. Teresa, did you want to offer a comment? Okay, well, it looks like Teresa has left our call today. So I'm just want to do one final call to see if anyone else has any other comments or questions. Well, thank you, Colleen, for describing the work that you have underway as part of the OPHA work group, as well as work happening in your region. And as you say, always encouraging others to get involved. And just on that note, our built environment work group also is looking for more participants to be part of a new task group looking at economic housing segregation. So I just wanted to let people know about that. And David Ponka is the co-chair of that group, and feel free to contact him as well. Colleen, just back to some of the points that you were raising, one of our participants, I believe Justin, was talking about changes to the Highway Traffic Act, and OPHA was very pleased to forward ideas that came forward from our Built Environment Work Group around ways to enhance that legislation, and also pointing out key parts that are critical to keep in. So we're keeping a close eye on the election, and when a new government comes on board, that's certainly something that we can look at again, is bringing forward those ideas that were identified by the Built Environment Work Group around ways that we can promote bicycle safety and reduce injury and promote road safety. So we look forward to working with your group as well as others to tackle these issues, and want to thank everybody for taking the time to join our presentation and discussion today. Thank you. And thanks again to you, Colleen, and your group.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.